Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, today, here in the United States, there is more talk that the Ukrainians are going to receive the ATACMS long-range precision-guided missile system. So this is a missile that is designed to be placed onto a HIMARS system. So these ATACMS can be used, and I'm going to show you here very briefly. It can be utilized on the M270 multiple launch rocket system. So these two missile systems, both the M42 HIMARS and the M270 MLRS, are essentially the same system. This is a tracked system. This is a wheeled system, HIMARS. Now, both systems can use the ATACMS in conjunction with the 227 millimeter precision-guided rockets that they normally fire. So what does this do for the Ukrainian military? Well, let's look at the baseline HIMARS. Let's look at, say, the M31 A1 rocket system, the M31 that they are using right now in terms of range. And these are, again, very accurate missile systems. But if they were firing these M31 HIMARS with a standard 84-kilometer range, and let's say they pulled up next to a civilian area in Zaporizhia, and they wanted to launch an attack against Russian targets, what does that look like? Where can they hit? Well, they're striking targets just north of Melitopol. Now, obviously, if they go further east, if they do a scoot and shoot tactic where they move to the east of Zaporizhia and launch an attack, again, they're still north of Melitopol, they're north of Berdyansk, and they would have to get essentially down towards Orikhiv to even get on the outskirts of Melitopol. Now that puts, obviously, those HIMARS systems in range of some of the more standard systems of Russian heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. The Russians can actually hit targets in Zaporizhia. Now, do they have an abundance of those systems? No, they don't. And the Ukrainians have been using this tactic where they run up towards the front lines, launch the HIMARS, and then retreat back towards some of these larger cities to try and stay out of the range of Russian artillery strikes. Now let's look at a Russian, very common artillery round that is used by the Russian military. And we'll try to find this system right here. Again, very common, the 2S19, 152 millimeter artillery piece. And we're just going to use a standard round. And we're going to place that just behind a secondary Russian line. So again, you can see here it just covers some of these kill boxes that the Ukrainians have placed themselves in. So well behind the line of contact, the Russians are able to hit the Ukrainians. And if we move that forward to just behind the first line, so again, if the Ukrainians had moved those HIMARS near Orikhiv, and obviously the Russians would be able to strike those targets. And the Russians have other systems that extend even well further beyond that. Now let's look at what the ATACMS systems does for the Ukrainians. And I think this is very important to see exactly what the Ukrainians will be able to do with this system. So we're going to go back to HIMARS, and we're going to go to the M48 standard with a 300-kilometer range. And in this, we're going to place the HIMARS in downtown Zaporizhia. And then you can see exactly what the Ukrainians are able to do with that ATACMS. So remember, they were striking just north of Melitopol. Now with the ATACMS, with these large semi-ballistic weapon systems, they are able to strike deep into the Crimean Peninsula. They are able to essentially hit any target near Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, any target. If we move this system to an area such as Mykolaiv, just outside of Mykolaiv, for instance, then any target in Sevastopol is able to be targeted by the ATACMS. So a significant escalation if we start to see these very large precision-guided rockets start to drop on Sevastopol. Let's look at the Storm Shadow system. So again, if we're launching just outside of Mykolaiv, meaning that the HIMARS system is able to hide in civilian areas, and then very quickly, again, a road mobile system, just come to the outskirts, even if it doesn't, even if it stays inside of Mykolaiv, it is able to strike targets essentially anywhere in Sevastopol. Now then we go to the Storm Shadow. The Storm Shadow. Now this is a system that has to be launched from an aircraft. And we're really uncertain on how the Ukrainians and where the Ukrainians are launching these Storm Shadows from aircraft. But it has less range than an ATACMS. And if we go to, let's say, just to the west of Mykolaiv, because obviously the Ukrainians are launching these aircraft from western Ukraine. And then we have a scenario where it is launched from just to the west of Mykolaiv. Again, they are not able to hit Sevastopol. Now, if we have heard about the recent attack by Storm Shadow systems on Berdyansk. Now, we don't know how effective that attack was. Remember, the Storm Shadow moves quite a bit slower than an ATACMS. And it is easier to be shot down by Russian air defense systems than the ATACMS. So essentially, the Ukrainians were to have been flying near Dnipro and then launch that Storm Shadow. And in all probability, they were firing at very low range, which further may decrease the range of the Storm Shadow. So you can clearly see what exactly the ATACMS does in terms of giving enhanced capability to the Ukrainians. So we'll very quickly look at the a standard. Actually, we'll use the let's just stick with the standard HIMARS firing from downtown Zaporizhzhia towards Russian targets. So again, they're able to hit Tokmak. They're able to hit many of the frontline Russian positions. But getting to Melitopol, they're not able to do it. Getting to Mariupol, they're not able to do it. They're not able to, even if they launch these systems from downtown Kherson, they are not able to get into the Crimea with a standard HIMARS precision-guided rocket. Still very long range. It exceeds most artillery rounds by far at 84 kilometers. So again, launching from maybe downtown Nikopol. And we know the Ukrainians have been operating these HIMARS systems in built-up civilian areas. When we have seen the Russians try to target some of these systems in these areas, that's when we see civilian casualties. So firing out of Nikopol still doesn't hit Melitopol. But if we transition this to a HIMARS, a ATACMS, it changes things quite a bit. So firing from Nikopol, downtown, civilian built-up area, hard to identify. It's able to hit essentially almost anything in the Crimean Peninsula. It is able to target the Kerch Strait Bridge, firing from Nikopol. So a tremendous escalation in terms of capability for the Ukrainians if these systems are handed over to the Ukrainians. Now, do the Ukrainians have systems that can reach out and hit targets this distance? Yeah, they do. We have seen that they are using drone systems to reach out and hit targets deep behind Russian lines. And we also believe that the Turks have handed over systems to the Ukrainians of similar capability. Now, we don't know how many of those systems have been handed over, but they are using them. And this is why the ATACMS right now is so important. The perception for the Ukrainians is so important for them to get that system. If they are using it near Kramatorsk, again, probably west of Kramatorsk, there are Russian systems that have the ability to hit targets in that area as well, near Kramatorsk. But I'm going to have to cut this episode a little bit short. I have a person at my door, and I'm going to have to answer my door. I duly apologize. I was expecting a delivery. So the next episode very shortly is going to be a simulated nuclear attack on the United States. That will be out shortly. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.